Illness, it's something that, well, it touches all our lives, doesn't it? I mean, we've either, experienced it personally or seen a loved one struggle with it, or maybe just felt that shadow of it lurking in the background.
It's definitely a universal experience.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into how art reflects that experience, particularly through the lens of what's called slow death.
Interesting.
And to do that, we're focusing on Edvard Munch's painting, The Sick Child.
A powerful choice.
It really is. It captures this quiet moment of grief, between a mother and her daughter who's ailing. So we're going to explore the painting's symbolism, look at Munch's life and how it influenced his art, and ultimately see how art can be a mirror, reflecting the experiences of those facing illness.
I think what strikes me about The Sick Child is how it goes beyond just depicting a scene. Munch really taps into these universal emotions: fear, helplessness, love, those feelings that surround illness. He doesn't shy away from the rawness of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get too deep into the painting itself, maybe it would be helpful to understand who Edvard Munch was, what shaped his artistic vision.
Sure. So Edvard Munch was a Norwegian artist, lived from 1863 to 1944, and he's considered a leading figure in Expressionism.
Expressionism, okay.
Right. And that movement really emphasized expressing those raw, often difficult emotions, the ones we were talking about, through art.
Gotcha.
Think bold colors, distorted forms, a real sense of urgency in the brushstrokes.
Ah, so you can feel the intensity even just thinking about the sick child.
Exactly.
But what about Munch's life specifically? Did he have any personal experiences that might have, influenced his work, shaped his perspective?
Well, Munch's childhood was unfortunately marked by tragedy.
Oh.
He lost both his mother and his sister to illness when he was quite young. And this experience of loss, it cast a long shadow over his life. And it's definitely reflected in his art.
Wow, so the sick child, it's almost like an echo of that personal grief, transformed into something universal.
Exactly. He takes something deeply personal and makes it resonate with everyone.
That's heartbreaking, but it also explains why the painting feels so, I don't know, so deeply felt, so authentic.
Right.
Okay, so let's actually talk about the painting itself. What exactly are we seeing in The Sick Child?
Okay. So the scene is actually pretty simple, but incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
You see a young girl, pale and weak, lying in bed. Next to her, there's a woman, presumably her mother, and she's holding the girl's hand. The colors are muted, almost drained of life. You get this overwhelming sense of gloom just looking at it.
It's interesting that you mention the colors because it's like even the color palette is contributing to that feeling of impending loss of, life fading away.
Yeah, like even the colors are grieving.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there are those details, those small but significant elements that add these layers of meaning.
Right, like for example, the way the mother and daughter's hands are clasped. Such a simple gesture, but it's so loaded with emotion.
So
It speaks to that fierce love, that desperate attempt to hold on to something that's slipping away.
yeah, it's almost as if they're trying to hold on to time itself, to stop the inevitable from happening. I remember reading somewhere that Munch intentionally blurred the background in The Sick Child. What do you think he was trying to convey with that?
That blurred background is fascinating, isn't it? It's like he's visually representing the uncertainty, the fear of the unknown that hangs over everything. Will the child recover? What will the mother's life be like if she doesn't? These are questions the painting doesn't answer, so it leaves us to grapple with those anxieties.
It does, yeah. And this sort of brings us back to that idea of slow death that we mentioned at the beginning, because it feels like The Sick Child embodies that concept not just in the depiction of illness, but in the sense of time slowing down, of everything being in the suspended state of dread and anticipation.
You're right, it's not just about the physical decline. Slow death is also about the psychological and emotional unraveling, the way illness distorts our perception of time and meaning. And you definitely feel that distortion in The Sick Child.
I do.
The blurred background, the muted colors, those clasped hands, they all contribute to this feeling of being trapped in that liminal space between life and death.
And knowing about Munch's personal experience with loss, it just makes the painting all the more poignant. It's like we're witnessing a raw expression of his own grief, his own confrontation with the fragility of life. But The Sick Child also speaks to something larger, right?
Of course.
It makes me wonder how other artists throughout history have chosen to depict the experience of illness.
It's a common theme, for sure. The Sick Child isn't an isolated example. Illness has been a recurring subject in art for centuries.
Really?
Yeah, it's a way for artists to explore not just physical suffering, but also the psychological and social impacts of illness. It's a way to confront our own mortality, our vulnerability, and ultimately our shared humanity.
That's a great point. It's not just about the illness itself, but about what it reveals about the human condition as a whole.
Exactly.
And that's what we'll be exploring further as we continue our deep dive.
Yeah, we'll look at other works of art that grapple with these themes and see how they offer unique perspectives on suffering, resilience, and the search for meaning in the face of illness.
It's easy to get, caught up in the technical aspects of art, like the brushstrokes, the composition, the historical context.
Oh yeah.
But with a painting like The Sick Child, what really hits you is it's the emotional impact, right? It's that ability to connect with us on that level.
Absolutely. Much taps into this shared human experience.
Hmm.
Something I think we all understand on some level, even if we haven't personally faced the specific illness he's depicting. It's that fear, the helplessness, but also that fierce love in the face of potential loss.
It really is. It's like he's inviting us to step into that room with them.
Yeah.
To share in that moment between the mother and child. And by doing that, he's also making us confront our own mortality, the fragility of life.
Precisely. And that's where that whole philosophical dimension of illness comes into play. Remember we talked about slow death? It's not just about, the physical symptoms. It's about how illness changes our whole perspective on life.
Yeah.
It forces us to reevaluate our priorities.
Right.
Like, what really matters when you're faced with the possibility of losing everything?
Right. It's like all of a sudden, those everyday concerns, work deadlines, social obligations, all that just fades into the background.
Exactly.
And you're left grappling with these bigger questions about meaning and purpose.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that our time on this earth is finite. We don't have forever to pursue our dreams, to mend broken relationships, to tell the people we love how we feel.
It's almost paradoxical, but that sense of urgency, that awareness of our own mortality, it can be incredibly motivating.
Absolutely.
It can push us to live more fully in the present, to appreciate those small moments.
For sure. Illness, in a strange way, can make us more aware of the preciousness of life, that beauty that exists, even in the midst of suffering.
So this brings me to a question. How can art help us process all of this? I mean, we talked about how artists like Munch offer this window into the experiences of others, but what about our own personal encounters with illness? Whether it's direct or indirect, can art be a tool for reflection and healing?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Because art can be such a powerful form of self-expression, a way to work through complex emotions that might be, difficult to articulate in words. Whether it's painting, writing, music, any other form of creative expression, that act of creating can be incredibly therapeutic.
So it's not just about passively consuming art. It's about actively engaging with it, using it as a means to make sense of our own experiences.
Exactly. And that engagement can take many forms. I mean, it could be as simple as spending time with a piece of art that resonates with you, allowing yourself to feel those emotions it evokes. Or it could involve creating your own art, using it as a way to externalize your feelings, to give shape to your experience.
What about the idea of art as a form of communication? I mean, we often talk about artists expressing themselves through their work, but can art also help us communicate with others?
Oh, absolutely.
Particularly when it comes to difficult topics like illness and death, things that are hard to put into words.
It can be a bridge between people. Art can be that bridge, a way to share experiences and perspectives that might be difficult to convey through words alone. Think about how The Sick Child invites us to connect with the emotions of the mother and daughter. Even though we don't know their specific story, we can empathize. We can understand on a deeper level.
Yeah, it's like art creates a space for that empathy and understanding without the need for explicit explanation. We can look at a painting, listen to a piece of music, read a poem, and feel this immediate connection to the human experience behind it.
And that connection can be so powerful, especially when we're dealing with something as isolating and challenging as illness, right?
Yeah.
It can remind us that we're not alone, that others have, walked this path before us and found ways to cope, to find meaning, even in the face of suffering.
It's interesting because we often think of art as something separate from our daily lives, something to be admired in a museum or enjoyed at a concert.
Right.
But when we look at how art has been used to depict illness throughout history, it's clear that it's so much more than that.
It is. It's a reflection of our shared humanity. a way to explore those big questions of life and death, suffering, and resilience. It's a reminder that even in, the darkest of times, there's beauty to be found, meaning to be made. And perhaps most importantly, it's a testament to that power of the human spirit, to find hope and connection, even when faced with the unknown.
We've discussed how art can help us process our own experiences with illness, how it can foster communication and empathy. But what about the artists themselves? What role does creativity play in their own journeys with illness?
Ah, that's where we get to delve into this fascinating intersection of art and healing, where the act of creation becomes a lifeline, a source of strength and solace when facing adversity. We'll explore that further in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've spent this deep dive exploring how art reflects the whole experience of illness. But what about the other side of that coin? How does illness actually shape the artist and their creative output? It's a two-way street, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. It's a constant dialogue between the artist's life and their work. Think back to Edvard Munch. Losing his mother and sister to illness at such a young age, those experiences, they became woven into the very fabric of his art. Like the sick child, it wasn't just an observation. Right. It was deeply personal, a way for him to relive and process his grief, to put it right there on the canvas for everyone to see.
So creating art becomes a way to cope, to find meaning, even in the midst of suffering.
For many artists, yes. It's not always conscious, of course,
Okay.
but translating those, difficult feelings, fears into something tangible, a painting, a sculpture, a song, it can be incredibly cathartic.
This makes me wonder if illness can actually be a catalyst for creativity sometimes. Like, does that intense experience kind of push artists to explore themes they might not have otherwise?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there are definitely artists whose work takes a sharp turn after a diagnosis or a period of intense suffering. Frida Kahlo is a great example. Her self-portraits, often depicting her physical pain and the challenges she faced, they're both powerful and incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, and it's not just about expressing the negative, right? The pain.
No, definitely not.
There's also, the potential for finding beauty in it,
Exactly.
for celebrating life, even in the face of death.
Think of Henri Matisse. In his later years, he was bedridden, but he was still driven to create. Limited by his physical state, he developed this whole new way of expressing himself, using those vibrant cutout collages,
Oh, yeah.
those pieces bursting with color and life. It's a real showcase of the resilience of the human spirit. It's truly inspiring.
So it's almost like illness can kind of unlock a different way of seeing the world, a different way of creating. The limitations become opportunities.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It forces you to focus, to prioritize. All of a sudden, the trivial things that just fall away, and you're left with this raw, essential need to express yourself, to connect with something larger than yourself.
And for some artists, that connection, it might not just be inward, right?
Right.
It could also be about reaching out to others who are going through some more experiences, creating that sense of shared humanity.
Exactly. Art can be a bridge where words fail. A painting, a song, a poem. It can say, I see you, I understand, in a way that resonates so much deeper than conversation ever could. It's a way to offer comfort and solace to others.
So it's like art created in the context of illness, it becomes this shared language, a way for both the artist and the audience to kind of find comfort and feel less alone in those difficult moments.
That's precisely it. It's about creating community, recognizing that universality of these experiences, suffering, loss, but also hope, resilience. These are things that transcend individual circumstances. They connect us all.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, from the symbolism in the sick child to how illness has been portrayed in art throughout history, to the profound ways that illness can shape the creative process.
It's been quite a journey. What stands out to you most? What will you be carrying with you from our exploration?
For me, it's that realization that art has this incredible power. It's not just about reflecting reality, it's about transforming it. To take something as difficult as illness and turn it into a source of beauty, connection, even healing.
That's a beautiful takeaway. The sick child reminds us that even in the face of death, love endures. And art in all its forms, it can help us hold on to that love, that hope, even in those darkest of times. It invites us to contemplate our own mortality, not with fear, but with a sense of shared humanity. Connection to those who have walked this path before us. And perhaps it even inspires us to find our own ways to create beauty and meaning in the face of life's inevitable challenges.
Well said. It's been a truly moving and thought-provoking exploration. And to our listener out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some new insights into this relationship between art and illness. and maybe even sparked a desire to explore these themes further on your own. Whether you're drawn to the quiet grief of the sick child or the vibrant resilience of Matisse's cutouts, remember, there's a whole world of art out there waiting to connect with you, to challenge you, to comfort you. Keep looking, keep listening, keep feeling.